There were two undefeated teams in the NCAA this year, in Iowa and NC State. Now, unfortunately, because they were in separate conferences, we didn't get to see them wrestle in a dual meet. So what would happen if these two met up in a fantasy duel? Well, let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to Fanco Wrestling. On this channel, we talk all about wrestling news, tips, and lifestyle, and I invite you to join in the discussion every single week by going ahead and hitting that subscribe button if you're interested in wrestling news and content. Now, let's discuss these two behemoths of teams in Iowa and NC State. What a match this would be if these two wrestled. Now, there's been a lot of controversy around NC State because they finished the season ranked at number 3 in the NCAA, just below Penn State. And there's been some controversy about that as far as what their strength of schedule was. Did they have the quality of wins? Did they have the quality of competition? And I'll say that, yes, they did have some quality competition and a loaded ACC conference this year, beating Pitt, beating UNC, and beating Virginia Tech. 3 tough opponents, as well as Cornell and Princeton. On the other side, you have Iowa, who just went to the top of competition this year, defeating Penn State for the first time in many, many years, as well as defeating teams like Nebraska, like Ohio State, Michigan, and Oklahoma State. Iowa Hawkeyes just came out on top this year and looked really, really good the entire season. Iowa 13-0, NC State 15-0. But what would happen if these two met up in a fantasy dual meet? Well, let's look at these lineups so we can go through and discuss which team would win. So looking at these lineups right here, we first start off at 125 with Spencer Lee and Jacob Camacho. Now, look, Spencer Lee's undefeated on the season. Camacho's had a very solid year. He's a young guy, but he's a young guy and doesn't have the quality of wins that Spencer Lee has. We know that Spencer Lee is the number 1 pound-for-pound wrestler in the entire country, not just at 125, but in the entire country. Now, Camacho's made a name for himself looking good at number 15 in the country, and we could see him have a solid postseason, but as far as common opponents, things like that go, Camacho's had some common opponents in Fabian, in Medley, and while he does have some wins and losses to common opponents that Spencer Lee's wrestled, the difference is Spencer Lee's tacking, majoring, pinning those guys, whereas Camacho's just beating them. And so that's what's going on at 125. But at 133, if we move on now and talk about 133 with DeSanto and Tremblay. So the thing here is Tremblay has some decent wins. Not necessarily the same caliber as DeSanto, though. Tremblay actually has a loss on his record to Mickey Philippi of Pitt, and I think that's probably his biggest loss of the year. And while DeSanto has actually never wrestled Philippi, interestingly enough, I think that you look at those, I think DeSanto and Philippi are kind of more in the same caliber of wrestler as far as competition, as far as rankings go, and that's where that comes into effect. And so I think DeSanto probably pulls out the win there. Now, looking at 141, I think this is an interesting one when we look at Max Buren and Tariq Wilson. Now, these two have actually never wrestled. Wilson, actually, we look at common opponents in Chad Red. That's probably their most interesting common opponent. Now, Wilson actually has a loss to Red. He actually was pinned by him. And Murin also has a loss to Chad Red of Nebraska. Now, another interesting common opponent is Max Murin and Dusty Hone. Dusty Hone, actually, Murin has a win over him, whereas Tariq Wilson has a loss. Now, I think these two are similar wrestlers, and it would be interesting to see what would happen if these two wrestled, because Tariq has a little bit different of a style. He's a former All-American, which gives him some street cred there. But Wilson, I just love how he's able to get in on certain shots, how he's able to extend his arms because he has very lanky arms. He's a very lanky guy, and I think that would pose a different kind of threat to Max Murin at 141. Moving on to 149, and please, at this point in the video, make sure that you're commenting who you think would win each matchup in the comments below. I want to know who you think would win. I like putting it out there, giving you the tools to discuss what exactly would happen here. Moving on to 149, Pat Lugo and A.J. Lighton. Now, Lighton has a decent season so far. He's 18-8. Leighton of NC State is 18-8. Now, looking at their common opponents, both wrestle Maruka, whereas Pat Lugo has a win to him. Leighton actually has a loss to him. Not a bad loss, not a crazy loss, but he does have a loss to him. They also both have wins over Tanner Smith. And now, Lugo has had just an incredible season so far. While he does have a loss to the number 1 ranked Sammy Sasso, he has had an impressive win over Austin O'Connor and eventually, winning the Midlands bracket, which was a strong win in tournament for Pat Lugo. So I think that Lugo has the edge over Leighton in this match, as far as we're talking. Now, let's go back to this graphic to discuss 157. In 157, we look at Caleb Young and Hayden Hidlay. I think this may be possibly the best the best match of the entire duel, because Hayden Hidlay, and there's another one later on, actually, that I'll get to that I think will be just as exciting. But Caleb Young is number 6 in the country, and he has a recent loss to Wyatt Sheets of Oklahoma State, and other losses to Monday. That's another loss of his, whereas Hayden Hidlay has a win pretty much over all of his common opponents. He hasn't wrestled all the same opponents, but he has wins over all those common opponents. Now, interestingly enough, you look at some of the top guys of the weight, like a Ryan Deacon. Caleb Young has actually beat Deacon in the past. He beat him in the past, which, Hidlay has actually lost to him this season. He lost him at the Cliff Keen, Las Vegas. So that'll be interesting to see, what happens at NCAAs. But as far as this match, what's happening here, I think Hayden has the edge over Young in this match, which is one of the first matches in this duel where I'd say NC State has the edge as far as competition goes. Moving on to 165 pounds, we have Marinelli versus Bullard. This is where we get into the Bullard brothers here, Marinelli and Bullard. So Marinelli look, they both wrestled good seasons, and Marinelli is just... He's a top dog. Yes, he is the number 2 in the country. Yes, he has a loss to Vincenzo Joseph, but pretty much over everybody else that he's wrestled, he's just absolutely dominated and crushed. In the past, they actually have wrestled at the NCAA tournament. These are one of the couple of wrestlers who've actually had head-to-head competition. They wrestled at NCAAs in the past whenever Marinelli actually majored Bullard. Now, this season, as far as this season goes, Bullard has a few losses. Most of his losses are to top 25 guys. You look at Ethan Smith, at Schedule, Whitlake. Those are all guys that, Bullard's wrestled tough, but Marinelli's just putting the hammer down. This was a match I would claim. I mean, it's the Bull versus the Bullard. That would be an exciting one to promote, but that's I think Marinelli has the edge at 165. As far as 174, we get into the other Bullard brother, as well as Michael Kemerer. Now, Michael Kemerer is another wrestler at the top of his weight class, number 1 in the country. Bullard, similar to his brother, has a solid season. Saw him at the NC State, or the UNC duel, where he actually beat Clay Lott, which was a solid victory for Bullard. And a solid match for him. And I believe that was a kind of a comeback match too, which was exciting. But the thing here is, I think Kemerer just, again, he's just a step up above Bullard, a step up above NC State's wrestler at this point, whereas Kemerer is, he's coming up from a former weight class at 157 and has just looked absolutely strong, and just has so much strength and dominance over all of his opponents this season. That's why Kemerer has the edge. Now, 184, I think maybe the other best match of this duel, which is funny because I see the Hidlays have the 2 best matches of this whole duel, and of course Trent Hidlay is at 184, whereas you have Abe Assad or Nelson Brands for Iowa at 184 at the same weight. Now, Nelson Brands isn't ranked. That's because Abe Assad is in the lineup, but we've seen this weight go crazy all year for the Hawkeyes with Brands, with Cash Wilkie, and seeing everybody rotate throughout duels. And a duel is something where you could see a guy thrown out there that you haven't seen, wrestle every single duel or in tournament competition. So as far as these two guys, now let's look at common opponents. One of the biggest common opponents is Lujan, and Assad has lost him at Midlands, whereas Hidlay actually beat him at the Cliff Keen Las Vegas tournament. Now, Hidlay does have a couple of losses on the year to Bolin, to Dupre, and Assad. He has his loss too on the year. But they're both young guys, and these are two guys that we're going to see battle it out over the next couple of years. And I think some of the best guys to watch wrestle are these young guys, because really anything could happen in this match. I would give Trent Hidlay the edge, but Assad is somebody who, I mean, he's beat tough competition already this year in a Taylor Vans, and this is a toss-up. This is a toss-up for me. At 197, as we go back to the graphic, let's look at Jacob Warner versus Renan. Now, Renan is a guy, he's a national qualifier in the past, whereas Warner is a former All-American in the past. He was 7th last year. Now, Renan is actually bumping up from 184, last year's 184, this year at 197. And he lost a little bit of his edge this year that I've seen. Last year we saw Renan start out very, very strong season, had dominant wins over a couple of, top-ranked opponents at his weight. This year, not so much, which is kind of unfortunate for him bumping up, whatever that situation may be. Now, I think this gives Warner the edge right now, because if he does have wins over common opponents, but Warner does like to keep it close, so I don't think this would necessarily be like a blowout of a match, whereas Renan is tough. He usually doesn't lose big by big points, and Jacob Warner doesn't necessarily put up big points. So I think this would be a good match, but I give Warner the edge. As far as 285, the last match of this duel, and then I will get into what my score prediction would be. Let's talk about Cassiope and Deontay Wilson. Now, Cassiope has been on his game this entire year. A young guy coming out strong. He does have a couple losses. You look to guys like Gable Stevenson and Mason Paris, but over the rest of his competition, he's been a dominant force to be reckoned with at heavyweight. Now, Wilson, I think, is an exciting guy to watch wrestle this year. We've seen him pull out exciting victories in the past in big duels where it's come down to him. Looking at the UNC duel when he beat Gunning of UNC in the last match that came down to him, and looking at beating Borst of Virginia Tech. I mean, he's a young guy. He's a sophomore. But I think that Cassiope has the edge here. Although, if Wilson could pull out something crazy, maybe this is the match to do it. But I have to give Cassiope the edge. Now, as far as what would the score be? I think that, look, NC State has a lot of great wrestlers, and they match up really well with ACC competition. But you put them up against an Iowa who has some 5, 6. Number 1, number 2, number 3 ranked wrestlers in the entire country. That's tough. Now, yes, they have the Hidlays who are going to give NC State that edge. You have the Bullards who are tough, and guys like a Tariq Wilson or Renan who are former wrestled at the national tournament and have pulled out impressive victories. But I just don't think that NC State would be able to pull out a victory over Iowa. I think that this duel would probably come down to a 29-6, maybe a 26-9 if NC State can get one of those swing matches. I really don't see NC State scoring more than 10 points in this duel. However, I would love to hear what you have to say about this. If you think I'm completely wrong, in which matches you think NC State could win, please leave your comments down below so we can join in on the discussion.